Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen now so that you can see a presentation and go into slideshow. I, of course, work for Sherry Boston, who is the district attorney for the Stone Mountain Judicial Circuit, but we call ourselves the Office of the DeKalb County District Attorney. And so some of the slides as an introduction may be familiar to you all who attended the NAACP session last, but I thought it was important to go over some of the roles of the district attorney and how that differs in Georgia from in other states. So in Georgia, the district attorney represents the state basically in all of the criminal proceedings in the Superior Court and the juvenile courts, and any other duties required by law. And in our circuit, we have both a district attorney and a solicitor general. The solicitor general is the elected official that prosecutes in the state court of DeKalb County. And so our offenses are bifurcated. The Superior Court handles felonies, although we do have jurisdiction over some misdemeanors. But the state court handles all of the cases that come through with a misdemeanor where there's no felony attached. And finally, we added, because we know that we are an elected office, and so as the elected official, Ms. Boston has tasked our office to be responsive and accountable to the community. And so we wanted to convey our mission statement. And so I've got it here, but the mission of the Office of the DeKalb County District Attorney is to safeguard our community through vigorous and fair prosecution of felony offenses occurring within the Stone Mountain Judicial Circuit. We seek to accomplish this goal by preserving the dignity and best interests of our victims while using smart prosecution strategies that balance offender accountability with prevention, intervention, and restorative justice. We believe in the power of engagement and in building relationships with our community partners for the betterment of DeKalb County. And our vision is also to endeavor to restore faith in the criminal justice system and disrupt cycles of violence, trauma, and recidivism in our pursuit of public safety and justice. And so that's really important here. The words that are within our mission statement, prevention, intervention, and restorative justice, are many of the ways in which my unit, the diversion and I'm sorry, I've forgotten, diversion and alternative programs units has interacted with the public, has created programming to make sure that people have a second chance at avoiding permanent criminalization. And we believe that creating that intervention strategy is part of restorative justice. So when we're talking about a smart approach to cases, we want all of our attorneys to begin with the ending in mind. What result do we want for the community, the victim, and the offender? So it's not just what is available to us within the limitations of the criminal justice system, but what are the end goals for everyone who is affected by crime? And so we have several restorative approaches, which include pretrial diversion. That is a self-directed diversion program where those who have been charged with a low-level offense are able to, basically settle the case and get a dismissal and record restriction.
You can bring that up if you want.
Which used to be called expungement. So the next one we have is accountability courts. This is for someone who needs more serious intervention because they are dealing with either substance use disorder or another mental health disorder. And so this option is court supervised. It's one of the court programs that we do participate as a stakeholder with, but it's supervised by the judges. And it also allows people to come away from the criminal justice system without having a criminal record. The third portion of what I'll be talking about today is the Stride Youth Program. And so I wanted to let you know that this is part of our strategy with regard to intervention and preventing recidivism and preventing a lot of mass incarceration. The others are a part of the strategy, but not necessarily what we're going to be talking about today. So as an example, we look at diversion as restorative justice. The victims usually like diversion, which because for them, they didn't ask to be a part of the criminal justice system. And continuing with the prosecution sometimes involves a lot of effort on their part, loss of time at work, and other burdens that they didn't ask for. So they typically like pretrial diversion because they get some relief from the system, and that we can often ask for restitution, for other conditions, for stay away, and for relief from court proceedings. But they also frequently express that they want the person who created the harm to actually get some treatment. So that is sometimes one of the terms. For the person who created the offense, opportunity to avoid criminal record while making it right with the victim and the community. And for the community itself, less recidivism, less cost to taxpayers for justice, and more employable citizens coming away from the justice system. Accountability courts have similar results, as you'll see, or the similar things that we're looking for. And Stride, for youth ages 17 to 24, that stands for Stopping Trends of Repeat Incarceration with Diversion and Education. So it has those same benefits that we talked about to the person who is the victim of the crime, to the person who committed the crime, and to the community. But it is a recognition of the brain development stage of the youth that are involved from the ages of 17 to 24. And this program was instituted to interrupt a cycle of recidivism where it starts at the age where most enter the system. And we know that youth in this particular age group are more likely to encounter the criminal justice system. And so we'll talk about why that is. Specifically, while youth of this age make up only about 9% of the population, they are represented at 23% of the total arrests that occur in our nation. So they are typically overrepresented, and there are some good reasons that this may occur with regard to their developmental capacity. They're different from people who are younger than them and different from adults who are older. So when we're comparing them to young adults are more cognitively developed than youth, better able to regulate and self-control, under less parental supervision during this time, but are more likely, or statistically more likely, to commit serious offenses. And comparing them with older adults, so the greater proportion of the young adults are less able to moderate their responses in emotionally charged situations. They're less likely to consider future consequences in decision making, and more likely to experience behavioral health disorders. And that's because many mental health conditions actually emerge and become symptomatic before someone reaches the age of 25. And they're also, which is the good part, more amenable to positive interventions. This is a time where someone is an adult and yet they are very elastic in their beliefs and are capable of having real change in their lives. So because we're dealing with that age group and we know that they are, you know, capable of great change. We want to, Stride has certain elements to it to create a little bit more civically responsible and civic minded young people. And the elements that we put together are cognitive behavioral therapy that addresses criminogenic thinking, civic education and engagement, community service days that are modeled more after corporate community service events, restitution to the victim, education and career assistance, and literacy and reading goals. So our cognitive behavioral intervention is offered by one of our community partners, American Alternative Court Services. And we actually pay for the counseling for our youth because cost has been one of the biggest barriers for the particular population that we're serving. And so when I talk about it, I'm talking about those youth who may not have finished high school, who may have grown up in an impoverished area with not a lot of economic mobility, or a lot of opportunity. So they don't see the opportunity that is available in our county because of where they in particular are living. And so a lot of the times we talk about cognitive behavioral intervention and why we're doing this. It's not really a rehabilitation, but I have found that it's almost a habilitation, like almost, creating the mechanisms by which we make decisions and really breaking down the circumstances in our lives and how to appropriately respond to that, and giving those youth the tools that they need to do that. And the reason we wanted to go with this particular type of intervention is because the research in juvenile justice intervention programs indicates that this cognitive behavioral intervention piece is the most important intervention element with young people. And it actually creates a larger difference in interrupting that cycle of recidivism than do simply employment or education assistance. And this cognitive behavioral intervention allows the youth to engage in enhanced decision making for personal relationships, for both conflict and collaboration. And that's kind of the most important factor in their future success. And it's not that's limited just to who are in the criminal justice system. So we treat this particular counseling when we're talking with our participants as more of a leadership and life enriching counseling rather than calling it an offender counseling or telling them that this is specific to your criminogenic needs. It's very intentional that we don't call our participants defendants. We don't call our participants criminals. We don't label the things that they are doing as things that are punitive, but rather those things that will actually have value and benefit for them going forward. Our next piece is the civic engagement and education. And we partner with RED, which is an organization that is for criminal justice reform and diversion of youthful offenders. And so this civic engagement is meant to increase the ownership of civic benefits, and with that to show the equation of civic responsibility. So to show how their government affects them in their day-to-day lives, to show them how they can have a voice in that process, to engage them, to participate in the process, to talk about things like criminal justice reform and let them know that they do have a voice in that space, and their opinions with regard to the changes in the laws in criminal justice need their voices. And um, the community partnership with RED allows them to participate both with an online platform of learning for their rights, for governance, and for things like that, but also provide mentorship and opportunities to engage with the lawmakers on Criminal Justice Day. The picture that I showed at the very beginning of the Stride introduction was some of the youth participating in our Criminal Justice Day at the Capitol. And so they are involved in learning more about criminal justice reform. And we think that that helps them take ownership of their own place and where they are, and have investment in completing the process to get their dismissals and record restrictions. Community service is a part of our program, but it's different than community service is generally used in the criminal justice system. So many of the offenses that we have in Stride are not a specific victim, but to the community at large. So these offenses are higher risk for public safety, but not necessarily a particular victim involved. So we do have firearms cases, cases where young people are dealing drugs, cases where young people are stealing cars, breaking into cars, and sometimes even houses where the victim has expressed a desire that that young person should have a second chance. And so these type of offenses, some are, very few of them in our group are actually what we would call victim crimes under the Crime Victims Bill of Rights, but they often involve societal harms. So community service is a recognized form of restorative justice, and in that it provides a measure of reconciliation with the community harmed. And there are psychological benefits to community service. When it's not done in a punitive way, community service actually can make one feel better about their position in society. Giving back tends to do that. And there are studies that have found that that remains the case, even in situations where they were court ordered to do community service. But we try to eliminate a lot of the problems that are generally found in community service that is used in the criminal justice context, such as, access problems, manual servitude kind of community service, and more punitive or less desirable activities. And we engage in community service as a group together, both the participants and the teams that are involved and their mentors if they want, in a way that looks more like what companies do on their corporate give back days, because that we think that that represents better what community service looks like in our community for the people who are voluntarily out there and doing it. So we work with Hands On Atlanta to find group projects that we can all do together. And those have ranged from the sorting of Christmas gifts for foster kids with Clark's Christmas, to engaging in gardening and community gardens in South DeKalb with Partnership and Action for Healthy Living. So we are out there working with nonprofits that are accepting volunteers from all walks of life, not just community service that is court ordered. Restitution is also one of the most basic restorative aspects that exists within criminal justice, and that is the idea that you can try to make things as right as possible with the victim. We only grant restitution or require restitution for those types of cases that involve individuals, and those are individuals as defined by our Crime Victim Bill of Rights and Marsy's Law. So that does not include corporations. So those victims that are, for example, fraud and things like that from Walmart, we don't have a lot of those types of cases in stride because we're looking for more serious cases or more public risk cases. But if it is a corporate victim, we are typically not requiring restitution. And restitution for an individual victim is for out-of-pocket loss expense, but also sometimes for a loss of the value of an item. So for example, we had a case where the person stole a phone. He set up a purchase on one of the online marketplaces and ended up robbing the person of their phone once they got there. So it was required to not pay for the entirety of the phone because the phone was eventually returned. But because it took so long to recover that phone, he lost some of the market value. That was no longer the phone that was, in style or able to be sold at the same price. So we asked him as part of his agreement to cover the difference in value, which I think was about $200 between the value of the phone when he robbed the person to the value of the phone when the phone was returned to the victim. For educational and career resources, we partner with WorkSource DeKalb in Georgia. So it's part of the WorkSource Georgia network, but they have a program that is called Hype Youth Work Preparation Program. It's kind of like a paid internship, which involves education in workplace skills that may not be taught in the normal classroom, and workplace norms that they may not have seen in their day-to-day life. And it's done as part of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or what we call WIOA. Those are grants that are to serve in workforce assistance to marginalized groups or to underserved groups. And everyone who is facing a charge in the criminal justice system who falls within that age range is covered by this grant funded employment assistance program. So we make sure that they both know about the programs that are available to them and collaborate with WorkSource to get them evaluated at the least. If they aren't interested in services, this is totally voluntary. But we want to make sure to connect them with all of the opportunities that are available to them. And this and WorkSource also assisted with the job placements within the county after participants graduated. And finally, our literacy and reading. This was going to be a small part of the program, but we'll talk about this in a moment, but coronavirus hit our first cohort. In that the court system shut down during the middle of our program. And so this became a huge portion of the interaction that we had with our participants. We had given them an approved book list with a diverse voices, but all were related to either building success or overcoming struggle. And the presentation they were required to do at the end of the program was to educate each other about the lessons that could be learned from the material. And so they were each gave a 5 to 7 minute presentation on what they had read. It turns out that a lot of them picked the same book. which was the book that's pictured here, Makes Me Want to Holler by Nathan McCall. And so we had a bi-weekly book club that kind of emerged during the pandemic to discuss the chapters as they read them with one of the members of our staff, Mr. Isaac Howard. And so that turned out to be one of their favorite portions of the program, and their presentations were really good with regard to the things that they learned from this book. And, you know, the ones that chose other books gave really great presentations to that as well. One chose the 4 agreements, and really gave a great presentation to his fellow participants regarding what he had learned in reading that book, and how he specifically had applied it to doing the program and to, you know, improving his life overall. And so this, as I said, was a very new program. And we just started this cohort in 2019 in the fall. So they were only about halfway through the program when the district attorney's office went remote because the courts closed down for the public health emergency. And we coordinated with our partners very quickly to make sure that we had a way to still engage with the services virtually, especially the counseling portion of the services. And we also had a lot more difficulty among our participants facing setbacks and economic hardships, especially with regard to the lack of transportation options. When the public transportation shut down, it was a huge problem for many of our participants. And so they were, most of our participants were able to participate in meetings and in their counseling by Zoom. And just like we're having this meeting, we had meetings for them, speakers and book club and counseling to finish out the year. We were thankfully able to complete some of the community service and the civic engagement portions before the shutdown. So they had their opportunities to sign up for and to do those projects prior to us losing that ability. And we did end up losing a few participants after the shutdown. So they kind of fell off of our radar. We weren't able to do location on them. And when the courts restart, and if they don't show back up to court, they may actually face bench warrants, because we don't know, they're not responding to mail or other communications. And finally, our next cohort has already begun. This will be our second cohort. And so we switched things up and tried to be as flexible as possible in creating something that would give them the opportunity to avoid those consequences that are associated with having that permanent mark of felony on their record. And so we started in March with our orientation and sign up. April in training with the reporting and the requirements of the program, and the software that we're using in that reporting is something that is entirely within their control, and it's a tool for self-accountability. So there's not someone tracking them down all the time for each little piece of the program. They've got the plan, they can access it through their phones. They choose what information they share. They also have all of their information where they can't lose it in the cloud. And so it puts them more in charge of their reporting, and almost makes, I don't want to say gamified, but it is. It's a challenge. They have the challenge and the plan in their possession, and work toward meeting those challenge points to complete the program. They've started Our first speakers meeting and counseling is starting this month. We actually have the Credible Messenger program is going to be talking about the collateral consequences of becoming a felon, not in a scared straight, but more of a real discussion of, even if you don't go to prison, being on probation is incarceration on the outside, and how that can impair their ability to provide for their families and reach their own personal goals. And so we're doing that this month, and they start the counseling this month. In June, Red comes on with their mentorship evaluations and the civic education. And by July, they'll be matched with their mentors for the remainder of the program. And this is a new program. Our last cohort did graduate in October of last year, and this cohort started in March, and we are finding that it can be very difficult during a pandemic to keep up with the pace that we would normally be working in, where we actually having in-person programming. And so I'll open it up to question and answer about the STRIDE program and about restorative justice in our office.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead. I have a question. I was just wondering, in this amazing program, is there a point where you check to see if they have skills or certain talents that will help them in the future, that you could, let's say they have a artistic talent.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone in the mentorship then work with that so that at some point in time they can use something that they have a gift for? Could it be music? Could it be writing poetry? Whatever that is there any kind, I don't want to say test, but a way to find out? I'm sorry, my video stopped.
That's
a
fine.
way to find out whether there's something there that you can build on.
Yes. So when while we're doing all of these elements, we are interacting with them pretty frequently, not just us, but their mentors. And so the philosophy of the program is that they are not the crime that they committed. They are not their worst day. They are, young people who have a lot of potential. And so during the time that they're with us, we do our best to redirect them to those more positive things that they may be interested in. We actually do surveys during their beginning of interaction with us that include what types of hobbies and interests they have, and keep that up throughout, the exit surveys, and showcase some of their own talents. We had one of the participants showcase his rapping ability during his presentation on his book. And, a lot of people think that they can do it, but it takes a lot of skill to freestyle like that. And he did a really great job with it. We had another who was like really grinding to get his music career off the ground. Unfortunately, he was not a graduate of ours, because he was possessing weapons in violation of his agreement. That is one of the big things. We do have you got to give up the guns while you're with us. Maybe not forever, but while you're with us. And so he unfortunately got another case that involved a weapon. And So we're constantly looking for those talents that they have when they interact with WorkSource. That's also not a here, just go do this welding job. Welding jobs are great. They pay a lot, but maybe that's not your cup of tea. Maybe that's not what you want to do. So that they are looking at what their individual personal goals are for what they want to do in life. That was a great question, but that, I hope I answered it well.
Lisa, I'm curious about the Workforce Opportunity Investment Act. I know that program usually has benefits of getting paid tuition and books
Mhm.
for particular professions that are highly needed. I was just curious as to the young men that have gone into that program, what professions do you see them going into or trying to apply to with the Workforce Opportunity Investment Act?
So we had one person that opted last year to participate with WorkSource out of the 20. It is voluntary. We don't, we make them go and have an appointment and do an assessment and talk with them about the opportunities that are there for them, but we don't make them go for any of those opportunities. And the young man who did their work, I believe that he was studying what is the radio or audio technology that goes into being a radio station producer.
Mhm.
So that's what he was doing over at Georgia Piedmont, I believe. So, there are a lot of different things that are covered under this
Mhm.
Workforce Investment Act that we don't think of typically, but they can choose for those if there's something that they like to do there. We had some that were just interested in making money. One
Yeah.
didn't want to do it because he had a job that paid really well. And I was like, well, you've got a $15 an hour job. And if that's enough for you right now, we're not going to make you do this other thing, but we do want you to meet with them and talk with them about your goals. So if your goal is to make money right now, that's fine. And so that's how we handle that particular portion.
And how many do you usually have in each cohort? Like, what's your, I guess, range of number of participants?
We have a capacity for 20 in each cohort, and it doesn't seem like a lot of cases, but in our jurisdiction, there's we still, we have to struggle to find, people who want to do this. So we have to clear or approve more than 50 people to participate in the program to get a cohort of 20.
Okay.
It's because we send the invitations out and we invite them to find out more about the program. We did that at the beginning of March, and it took all of the month to get 20 participants to sign up.
And what has been the success rate with this program?
So we're in our first year, and our first year was a pandemic year. So it was, I don't know whether we have great measurement for it, but we did have 6 successful graduates out of that program, and they have not reoffended during their time in the program or since then.
And did you have a full program at that time? Did you have 20 participants or you had less because of the pandemic?
We had 20 when we started in September of 2019, but it dwindled quickly to, I think, 10 by April because of the pandemic. So we had a good cohort. We only lost one to a serious violent offense, and he was one that had significant mental health that hit our team pretty hard. Significant mental health problems and was homeless, and we attempted to get him placed several times, and when we did get him placed, he ended up leaving Covenant House and I think the Atlanta Mission
Mhm.
as
Yeah,
well.
Atlanta Mission.
Yeah, so we worked with their social workers and everything to try and keep him, but he went back out on the streets and unfortunately eventually had killed someone. So that was a hard thing to take, but when I heard about the program in King County being disrupted by a person going out and committing a serious offense when they were in the beginning of the program, that was what I thought of. This person, we tried to reach him. He signed an agreement, but he never got any of the interventions that we were offering because he kept going back out onto the streets and we had difficulty reaching him and keeping him. So it's unfortunate, but if you're going to expand alternatives for the criminal justice system to deal with, especially young people, differently, you've got to make some courageous decisions, including taking those young people who are less stable in their lives. If we limited our diversion program only to those people who had great family support and only to who had a great place to go to school and a good community to live in, then we would also be doing a huge disservice to our communities.
I'm just curious about how your program is managed. There seems to be a lot of moving parts to it. And are you the lead person? Is there a team? How does that work?
So I am ultimately the lead person, but I don't do all of the interactions. We have a case manager, Miss Tina Padilla, who does excellent work in keeping, more regular contact with the participants. Mr. Howard handled a lot of the meetings with regard to the book club and speaker events, and my entire team kind of kept up with progress and collaborating with partners. So I have a very small team, but we are all very experienced and have been both prosecutors and defense attorneys during our career, so we know how to work with individuals and kind of coach them in how they can move forward from the process.
So I'm going to suggest Candace go next and then Steve. I'll keep track of who's in line.
Oh, thank you. Candace McKinley, DeKalb County Public Schools. I may have missed this, but what is your contact with the school district? And if there isn't one, can we forge a partnership?
I would love to forge a partnership with someone at the school. Candace, are you one of the school social workers, or do you work with DeKalb County Schools?
Yes, I'm over at AIC. I work in the district new office of school innovation. I'm also an attorney. I came in as in-house counsel, but working in this new division to disrupt this school to prison pipeline.
I love to hear it.
Yeah, we are reimagining discipline and all kinds of inequities that have been, exploding during the pandemic. So I would love to connect with you and see how we can partner.
I'd love to do that as well. So I took down your name, and I bet I can find you.
Yes. I'm sorry, I have a lot going on tonight. I'm actually in the car, so I was trying to be responsible and not be a liability. So I didn't want to be on video.
Don't worry about that. I actually handled, I was a prosecutor for educational neglect for many years.
Oh,
so
okay,
I worked
great.
with the school system then. With this group, we've only had a couple of people that are still in school in the school system. when they're on the younger side, when they're 17 or
Yeah.
or so. And so I'd love to be able to facilitate their participation. We do try to make sure that our activities for them are outside of school hours. We make a deliberate effort to make sure that we're after school and evenings and weekends, because we don't want to interfere with education or pull them out of school any more than necessary because
Okay.
of that experience. Like, I don't want any absenteeism.
Right. No truancy. Well, great. What I've heard has just been phenomenal, and thank you for your work.
Thank you for your support.
Yeah, Candace, just so you know, we will have this recorded if you missed part of it on the RJAG restorative.justice.org.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And Steve, I think, is next.
Hi, Steve.
Yes. Hello, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us. I actually have a lot of questions. So my first question is, how did you choose the vendors for the program, and what was the evaluation of the curriculum that they were using like?
So in the first cohort, we looked for a provider that was doing a curriculum called Thinking for a Change. That had been used and validated in criminal justice settings prior to our having the program, and was pretty much lauded as the evidence-based curriculum to use for anti-recidivism. And so there weren't a lot of providers that were out there offering it. And so we tapped one of the reason we chose American Alternative Court Services was because they not only had individuals certified to do that, but they were also already doing that curriculum for accountability courts in our jurisdiction. And I'm very protective of my participants. I never want my participants to feel like guinea pigs or to experiment with their time. So I did want to choose someone who had experience with that curriculum. We did decide to make a change this time though, because with the pandemic creating those difficulties, the curriculum for Thinking for a Change doesn't allow for individual movement. So if somebody is absent a couple of times, then the whole cohort can't move. So we wanted to make sure there were two counseling groups of 10 each, and that's the same this year. If you get too big of a group, it doesn't work. But the curriculum that we're using is moral recognition therapy, which has similar elements to it. I was already familiar with that curriculum, but it also allows for individual progress. So, for example, we didn't have to discontinue someone if they missed too many sessions. They would be able to make it up. So we didn't have to give up on them as easily. And I thought that that was really important, that they have that individuation of their, and the group also holds each other accountable, because it's the individual group, the entire group, that decides whether that individual has gotten the message or the lesson and can advance to the next thing.
Thank you.
Oh, also that counseling service, the particular owner of that counseling service was willing to provide us with very subsidized counseling for this, using his nonprofit organization to fund some of the counseling, and include things like the individual counseling at significantly reduced rates if the individual needed mental health counseling, as well as that particular So if they needed additional, they could get it for a lot less than they would in a typical circumstance. For example, $5 to $10 a session.
Right, thank you. I have other questions, but I'll let others go ahead.
Okay, yeah, bring yours back up, but we'll keep going at least till 8:30, I think, unless Lisa wears out before then.
I love talking about this.
Good. Susan Cole is next, and then Geraldine after her.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much. This is really interesting and encouraging. And I have a lot of questions, but I'll try to narrow what I want to ask. I want to know something about the selection process for the cohorts. What are the criteria and who decides?
Okay, so my team does decide. We don't, but we decide for all of diversion throughout the county. That's different from other jurisdictions. In other jurisdictions, it depends on what courtroom you get assigned to and what prosecutor you get. In our office, we maintain that consistency by having the same team, by having those written standards and guidelines as to what is admissible. But we also, there is somewhat of an art to it. For stride, we don't want to take anyone who does not need that higher level of intervention. So if we have somebody who committed a crime, but has all the resources that they need at their disposal to do the things on their own, we may allow them to do pretrial diversion. They've got supportive family, they've got things like that. But pretrial diversion is also at their own cost. So they are using their own family resources to get that done. So they maybe do almost similar things. But stride is for those folks who are at a higher public safety risk. So maybe not first time with the criminal justice system. Most of our participants have juvenile histories already, and they're about to become felons if we don't intervene. They may have some misdemeanors. So they already have an experience with the criminal justice system that may not have worked as far as the intervention goes before. So this program is also not for somebody who has severe substance use disorder or a persistent mental health disorder that is interfering with their life. They may be more served by the accountability courts. So knowing where to put someone is very important, because you don't want to under intervene with somebody, but you also don't want to over intervene. Putting more on somebody than they need can often create the opposite effect of what you want.
Thank you. Thanks.
What I say is treating someone like a criminal and criminalizing them may create a criminal.
Yeah.
So before the next question, I forgot, I was going to mention that Lisa is ending, I guess it's what, a couple-year term as president of the DeKalb Junior League. And she said she got some of her ideas, I guess, like the way the community service is done, and some of that, and some of the program that you went through as part of, or people do to join the Junior League.
So yeah, I put a lot of those elements into the design because a lot of programs and probation don't have a lot of flexibility for someone who is trying to get everything done. And that's not realistic to what we require of anybody else in any other circumstance in their life. We always have more flexibility when it comes to employment and when it comes to other organizations that we belong to. So for example, we want to make sure that we have multiple opportunities for a participant to fulfill a requirement. So you have to participate in 3 out of the 5 community service days that we do. It's not participating in, every single mandatory event. You have to be here. There's no exceptions. You're getting docked. We will offer multiple opportunities, and you just have to make sure to fulfill certain portions of that. And that was very similar to my junior league experience, and it was very similar to other leadership organizations I've been a part of. But that community service aspect and that flexibility was a big part of the program design.
So Geraldine, I didn't mean to get in the middle of your question. Go ahead.
No problems. And you can call me Jerry.
Jerry, okay.
Yeah, my question is for the youth that are in your program, if they are still living at home and the home environment is not a positive home environment for whatever reason, be it abuse or drugs in the home, how do you combat that if they're every day they're going to be home or back home into that environment? How do you
work with
towards that? Yeah.
So a lot of the participants that we actually have are legally adults, and they may have committed the crime when they were 17, but 17 is the age of adult responsibility. So by the time they get to us, they are 18, and we would be able to help them to find other housing arrangements, or find an apartment or something to that effect. So we employ our partners and our connections in the community although we as an office can't give it directly, we can connect them with all of the services that are available in our county and with our nonprofit partners. And there are more than are listed for Stride that work that we know about and work with. But we are always cognizant of those types of issues facing our young people. And especially with regard to young people who are part of the LGBTQ community, they sometimes have a real difficulty in being in the homes and finding a supportive environment at home. So we have to help them find a place to be independent adults.
Okay, I'm going to get back to Steve in a minute, but let's give everybody who hasn't had a chance to ask a question first. And I got a couple more I could ask too, but anybody else want to go now, or I'm sure Steve will let somebody else ask another question before 8:30 also. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, thanks again, Lisa. So another question that I have is related to community involvement, as well as it sounded like the restitution was based on the instance that you said was related to the victim being restored the cost of the phone. And I was wondering if the victim had any participation in what he or she thought that had been taken from them. So I guess that's kind of two questions about whether the victims participate in the restitution process, and if there's any community involvement with respect to the harms that are caused.
Those are great questions. So before anyone comes into a diversion program, we do make sure that we have contact with the victims of the crime. The restitution information that we get largely comes from them, unless they're unable to provide that type of information. And sometimes they don't request money compensation. Other times, like the value of the phone. Legally, he probably could have gotten the whole value of the phone, but it was, really only deprived of a couple $100 of the value because of the time that he didn't get to have that phone or didn't get to sell that phone. So they do get to participate. The victim does find out, what the program entails, does give feedback as far as do they want something, do they want or need something with regard to their safety or their feeling of safety. But large part, the victims are really just kind of practical and don't want, to be involved that much. So they always have a voice in what we're doing, but a lot of in our experience, a lot of them would prefer to be relieved of that responsibility. And they really don't hold a grudge as much as people would think, especially when it comes to young people. They do want to give second chances.
Anybody else have a question? I guess Lisa and I talked a little bit before we started about, what plans for the future besides this particular program, as far as what she would like to do with restorative justice, and whether maybe some kind of circle program might be coming up in the future, and how we might be able to help out, either in helping get people to know more about what restorative justice is, and also, offering support in some other way, volunteers or something. So maybe you could try to give us a little bit
Sure.
about the future and how we can help, that kind of thing.
So, your district attorney is very interested in restorative justice. Sherry has brought cases up for discussion for whether they would be appropriate for restorative justice, and we'd like to use it in contexts that are more in victim-related crimes. So, in our STRIDE program, it's more community is often the harmed party, but in other cases, for example, shooting cases or things of that nature, where we don't have a death, or even where there may be something more serious, restorative justice could be part of the process, not just from a criminal justice perspective, but from a victim-centered perspective. We know that people who are victims of crime, often feel like they don't have a voice of their own during the criminal justice process. Even with all of the victim protections that are in place, they don't have a sense of control, and they often feel like a third party to the action. And so we are looking for organizations that are engaging in restorative justice practices and circle practices. And so if anyone knows of facilitators that are actively working in our jurisdiction, I'd love to talk with them and interview them. For example, recently I spoke with one of the co-directors of Caminar Latino, and they offer a restorative justice support circles. So it's not the same as, offender, and the person harmed and the person receiving the harm coming together, but it is people who have been victim of crimes and of domestic violence participating in support circles in a restorative justice context. And so we're still doing a lot of research with regard to that. We're still spreading the message among our attorneys and among our prosecutors to change our office culture with regard to being more accepting of alternatives to simply, incarceration or probation. And we're looking forward to expanding that space. We think it would be best used in those circumstances where we have community members who are in the same community, and one may have wronged the other, but they still have to deal with each other in the community. That's a perfect circumstance where restorative justice may create a better result than simple incarceration could.
Donna put a question in.
I see that. It was Caminar Latino. And I discovered that in reading, there was a survey done of national programs that were using restorative justice practices, and they were interviewed during that survey, and they're like, they're right in our backyard. I can go and call them right now. And so tried to find out, what they were doing in this context. And so while they're not doing what we think of as, the person creating the harm, meeting the person who received the harm, they are doing RJ support circles.
Thank
And
you. It's
Candace,
good to know there are more practitioners around. It's good.
Yes, that's what we're looking for is some practitioners, and part of the reason we're looking for outside partners is that in doing a lot of the research that we've done, we found that restorative justice sometimes works best when the parties, attorneys, the prosecutor and the defense attorney, and all of the folks who are in the adversarial system get out of the way. So we recently had an attorney who did kind of a restorative justice aspect to one of his pleas. It was a young man who was charged with a lot of entering autos in different jurisdictions. So we couldn't do anything about his other convictions in other jurisdictions. But when it came to the one that was in our jurisdiction, the victim had a lot of damage to her car because when he took it, he left it on the side of the road with the sunroof open, and pretty much the inside was destroyed by rain and other damage from the highway that it was left on. And so he would never, she wanted restitution in the beginning, but she, eventually came to see how young this guy was, and that he would never really be able to pay that amount of restitution. It was more than $10,000 in restitution, and he simply didn't have those types of resources. And so they did meet, and our attorney and the defense attorney facilitated that, prepared both parties for it, prepared the defendant to, be able to accept responsibility for it in a way that would be received well by the woman. And she ended up, because she saw his sincerity, withdrawing her request for restitution and simply asking him to do his community service at a organization that helped the elderly. So that was one example. I think they ended up reducing the charge that we had to a misdemeanor, but couldn't do anything about him not becoming a felon because the other cases that he had in other jurisdictions.
All right. I have a question about so I didn't hear how long the program has been in operation, but I was wondering if there is any type of alumni program that's either set up or going to be set up where people could return, people who graduate from the program would be able to return and participate in the ongoing developments in some type of way.
We'd love to have our alumni participate with us in subsequent cohorts. We had 6 graduates, and you know, one of the graduates actually gave the address during our graduation, and so he got to give an address in front of the dignitaries and the CEO of the county, and you know, did a fantastic job. But we haven't had interest in them coming back yet. And part of it is, and it has to be voluntary, because part of the benefit of our program is getting to move on with your life and getting your clean record back, and, you know, never having to touch the criminal justice system again if you don't have to. So we understand if it is their passion to be involved, we'd love to have them actually be involved. We have some that are in another program that Red has participated with that do come back and are willing to lend their names and voices to the movement. But we, you know, that's one of the things, also why I protect the faces. And you saw I put emojis over the faces of our participants, because that privacy is a big benefit of participating with us. So even in our press releases or things like that, you know, a lot of people would want a spokesperson, would want somebody like that, but it is very important that they retain the benefit of that privacy.
What type of data do you all collect in terms of finding out how well the program is working, and perhaps how well or what your program would be able to teach programs in other counties?
That's a great question. It's one of the things that I really have wanted help on. We've been trying to find somebody to evaluate our program independently, and have spoken with a couple of people, and one of the professors over at Kennesaw State University actually put in an RFP to do the evaluation, but I don't think it was granted. It wasn't granted in the last cycle. We will continue to try, and until then, I am collecting as much data as possible and maintaining that. That includes the data on who we look at, who we look at overall, anyone that is referred, who we've chosen, you know, or approved, who decided to do it, who entered, the surveys that are done throughout their time in the program, and then afterwards, we also get releases for us to continue to run their criminal history, so we can measure recidivism, and you know, try and keep up with them voluntarily. But as I said, it's a little bit of a hard sell. That's why we would like to have an independent partner for evaluation purposes, because we feel they would be much more receptive. You know, if as well as we try our best to treat them, we are still prosecutors.
So-
We know that about ourselves.
So Lisa, you said it wasn't approved. Now, is that because it was within the district attorney's budget that you didn't have enough funds, or is this something we could help by encouraging our county commissioners to put some money aside for you? Or
That would help tremendously. When I did the research on program evaluations, the reason that we couldn't just get an evaluation done is because many program evaluations cost between $75,000 and $125,000. That's a lot of money. that was more money than we were putting into simply having the program and giving to our participants. And if we have the money to spend, we want to spend it on our participants. So that's why we were trying, and any help and connections with the academic community, we're trying to get a partner within one of our state universities to get that interest in studying this. And the RFP was not to the county government, it was to, I believe it was an external grant provider for Kennesaw State University. So it's not that they didn't like the project, it's probably that they chose another project over it. So we're still looking for that, and we have some allies in it, but that's part of the difficulty in data collection within the criminal justice context is the people who the data that we have isn't always organized in a way that an analyst can use them, and sometimes people don't know what to collect. So I'm collecting everything I can, but there may be spots that I'm missing because I'm not a data analyst.
Well, we're getting very close to the end of our, if we're going to end about 8:30, maybe first of all, let's we can give Lisa a round of applause, whether you want to unmute or not. Thank you very much, Lisa, for being with us and also for your work in this area. Does anybody have any? I'll make a brief. I'll just point you to the. I just put my email, and you know, to help connect. If people want somebody else's email or something, you know, send your emails. If you don't want it to go to everybody and whatever, you know, send it to me and I'll send it to somebody. But I don't get emails out of this process because we don't require people to register in advance. But we do require people to register for the Healing Justice film, which I think is you'll find a very good experience. A number of people who are on this call have seen it, and I encourage you to join us this Saturday at 9:30 if you haven't seen it, if you'd like to. Are there any other announcements or comments or anything or questions at the last minute here before we finish?
I have another question.
Okay.
So here in DeKalb County, at Emory University, they have pioneered an offshoot or a program called CBCT, which is cognitively based or compassion-based cognitive therapy, which is an offshoot of CBT or the CBI that you mentioned. I wonder if you were aware of that program, and was it under your consideration?
So that wasn't a program that I was aware of when we started this program. I am still not that familiar, but am thinking. I am a member of another nonprofit board that works with high school students to make sure that they don't face obstacles preventing them from graduating. You know, everything from physical need to social services and therapy and things like that. And I believe that they use a program and curriculum that was developed with that with Emory in that. And I can't remember what it's called. It's an emotional intelligence program.
The SEED program?
It is the C program. That's what it is. It was slipping my mind, but yeah. So they use the C program, and the organization is called CORE, COR, and they work in Carver STEAM and Carver High. So I try to keep up with some of the trends But that was something that was very new to me. And I only knew of it because of the different context.
Does the concept of nonviolent communication come up anywhere in the program? The nonviolent communication formulated by Marshall Rosenberg?
I'm not really sure, but I know that the cognitive behavioral, the curriculum that they're using talks about, you know, thinking in interpersonal decision making. So in circumstances of conflict or collaboration, where you either are in conflict with somebody or you want somebody to help you. Giving them kind of the step by step and the thought errors that come about when you have that situation come up, the remedies that you can take to control your own reaction and behavior, and like the techniques that you can employ with another person to resolve the situation. No, I am not a therapist or social worker by any means. I'm just an attorney who has a passion for changing behavior.
Well, I wouldn't put the just there. You are an attorney who has compassion for this. Yeah. I think we need to wrap it up for Lisa's time and the rest of us.
Thank you so much for having me, and
Thank you for coming.
for giving me an opportunity to share what we are doing in the DA's office. We're so happy for your support. I'm so happy to have a dream job in prosecution working for Sherry Boston, and having a boss who is also passionate about restorative justice.